Okay, so, the Conservative Convention. Not gonna lie, I haven't watched it all yet. I haven't watched a lot of it. I struggle listening to politicians speak when they are prepared with remarks and messaging and copy, because it sounds like messaging and copy as opposed to authentic expression. And the slogans, I get why they're doing them. The truth is they're also mnemonic devices. They're not just like kind of repetition for the sake of impact. They're also mnemonic devices so that you don't have to be reading your remarks, right? They kind of recenter you into your talking points. So I do get that. Doesn't make me less itchy when I have to listen to it. Okay, I much prefer long form interviews. And that's how I generally decide what I think about politicians and who I want to vote for. So here's the deal. I have a little bit of concern that we're going the way we did during the election, where everything got safer. Hedging, it's like it's like asking the AI a controversial question and getting a bunch of hedging and neutral and both sides out of both faces kind of thing. And I get it. I actually do fully understand the kind of undergirding philosophy and psychology and everything else that goes into making these decisions as kind of political analysts. And you guys are working in a past system still. And the problem I have with that is, number one, the system's a fiction. Number two, that fiction is so much further removed from reality than it ever has been before, at least in my lifetime. Number three, that fiction is being propped, boosted, and expanded and expounded and upon and grounded in to the public through state media and propaganda and sponsored content. Basically, all of Canadian news is now sponsored content, just sponsored by the taxpayer, essentially paying to indoctrinate ourselves. It's so frustrating. Anyway, but I don't think that's going to work. So I'm not going to talk about the talking points. I'm not going to talk about the policies. We all know the policies are good. We all know they're common sense. It's like, duh, obviously. Every time they announce, I'm like, obviously that's what you should do. Whenever they announce, oh, look what we've discovered, as if it's this, obviously we've known that for years. What are you doing? Okay. Now, the Conservatives MPs have been doing a really good job of kind of zeroing in on what they're trying to hide in the bills, especially around censorship. And it's really, really important to understand that vague language with months and months of effort and input into writing something like a bill by lawyers, a lot of lawyers and people that understand how to manipulate language in order to achieve end goals, right? I mean, that's kind of what politics is in a lot of ways. Anyway, I got a little distracted there in my rant. I'm trying to stay focused and keep this relatively short, but I'm like uber worked up about a lot of the stuff that I want to talk about here, and I'm just trying to orient and order my thoughts a little bit. But hey, it's called Cassandra Reads and Rants About It, so I'm gonna fucking rant a little bit. And it may not always be perfect and linear. I am neither linear nor perfect, so that is the way it shall be. But here's the deal. SAFE isn't gonna work. That said, we cannot lean into this full-blown daddy's angry and only has a stick either, okay? There has to be carrots and sticks. We have to work in a program of carrots and sticks. The problem is the carrot cannot be giving into the fictions. It cannot be engaging in the fictions while trying to fight against them. You cannot assert something outside of that something is fiction when you're stuck inside the fictional framework discussing it, right? So I'll give you an example. This stupid security clearance thing that's suddenly showing up let's just start here. The fiction is created in a lot of ways. Number one, propaganda from the media. We all know this. Any Canadian with a working brain that's been paying attention for more than a year knows this. Okay, we know it. We know it's biased. We know it's all left-leaning. We know it's subsidized. Up to 50% of every single journalist's salary is subsidized by taxpayers one way or another. 50% of their annual salary. since 2019. Okay, do you hear me? 50% subsidies for every journalist that is part of the qualified press, whatever they're calling it now, the Canadian Qualified Official Press Corps, blah, blah, blah. Insert weird, acronym from a communist situation here, please. Jeez, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm getting worked up. Anyway, our press is compromised. We all know this. And so they did this whole, security clearance thing. They let people come on and say it over and over and over again at the first election. But that's debunked. They can't do it anymore, right? So instead, they've got these bot swarms that are out freaking shooting that shit on every single story, on every social media post. Oh, well, why didn't you get a security clearance? Now, here are some radical suggestions. So instead of bitching about all the things that are wrong, I'm going to sort of bitch a little bit about the things that I have a problem with. And then I'm going to offer some radical pivot solutions, okay? Two for the government, 2 for the Conservative Party, and kind of one more intertwined suggestion for Canadians that are sick and tired of this shit and who are constantly feeling like they're fighting an uphill battle against the immersion of propaganda and the drowning out and the inability to know. Like, one of the beautiful things about comment sections in social media was that in the aggregate, you could get a sense of where the populace was, right? And we're starting to see that a little bit, especially on platforms that are doing a lot better at controlling bots and things like that. So X is a great space for controlling bots. I know there are other problems people have with it, but they are doing a way better job of managing overt bots and much better at managing AI like AI agents that are coming into the chats. I.e. like as opposed to Facebook and Instagram. But I think it's really important to understand that not only do we have like political parties and individuals and foreign agents and malicious actors and agitators and, even conservative political groups that are bot swarming and throwing shit out there everywhere to confuse and distort. And you get it. Well, they're going to say all the bad stuff with the bots, so we have to counter that with our bots. But it makes for a soup, and it's really frustrating, okay? So my advice to Canadians, when you see this shit, when you start to see repeat obvious talking points that have been debunked, that are boring, do not engage. Mute the account. Block the account. Don't comment on it. Try not to share it. If you start seeing them coming up a lot, a way to strategically engage would be, instead of participating in the fiction, being, oh, you're so stupid, everybody knows that isn't what happened. Boom, you've already bought into their story. You've already allowed them to create inertia in the narrative, right? And they've put you on in a defensive position. So instead of doing that, do a quote, tweet, reshare, repost, whatever you want to call it, and say, hey, weird how like 1,000 of these are suddenly showing up on every single post that mentions X individual during the biggest conservative convention of the year. Funny how all of a sudden everything that has to do with pure poly, well, it always gets bot swarmed, so that's a bit tougher, but regardless, this is my point. Find a way to snap out of the narrative. Do not allow the narrative to shape your engagement with it, if that makes sense. Do not buy into the fiction. Report them for misinformation if you have to. I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. Request community notes, especially if they're big accounts, if they're kind of, like Stephen Guilbeault got community noted after he freaking straight up lied. Which is hilarious, about the Alberta versus Quebec, who reached out to a foreign country to ask for support and help. Only one of them. No, actually both, apparently. Anyway, so these are you got to get out of the fiction, okay? Other things. Point out logical fallacies. Strategically exit the fiction and then point at it. Point at it and laugh. Point at it and scoff. Point at it and deride it. Point at it and explain it. Point at it and, I don't know, whatever it is you might want to do with it that could open up a mind to seeing the reality instead of the rhetoric, to borrow from our dear leader. Man, he's probably going to end up regretting he said that, like, before it's all over. this is the point, right? Okay. All they have is rhetoric. You may have noticed that all they do is try and like slam Pierre's tone and personality and, oh, nobody likes you. All of this lead up, if you thought that Pierre was in danger of losing the conservative leadership, and if you spent any time at all defending the fact that he might lose it, or, you know, responding to people saying he would, you bought into the fiction and you helped them win at their game. Their game wasn't to stop him from becoming the conservative leader or retaining his leadership. Their goal was to make you talk about it, to talk about how it wasn't going to happen, to defend the fact that it was, to create a narrative dialectic in which we are defending an obvious truth that everybody that actually knows. Anybody that's looking, anybody that's paying attention, anybody that's evaluating metrics, data, and hard analysis over weighted emotional narrativization and implicature, you know, teased into how they decide to ask questions, who they decide to bring on to answer them, how they interrupt and re-ask certain questions. When they're talking to conservatives, that's another thing. This whole, like, I watched a little bit of the conservative convention. It's so hard because you've got all these leftist media organizations pretending they're unbiased. it leaks out of them, right? They actually started having like full-on freaking tics in their inability to drive home that narrative, drive it home, because it's too overtly biased in that contextual reality, right? They can't go, oh, why didn't you get a security clearance? You can't bring that up when you're at the convention, because it will be debunked so fast, right? And because it's the convention, if they bring it up to a conservative politician, they have to let them actually respond and answer the question, and they have to let them do it fully. Because the premise of them being there and covering it is to inform Canadians in a neutral and unbiased way about conservative policy and what is happening in the major opposition party of the country, that 50% of the country, 40 whatever percent of the country have decided they would like to lead us. Okay? Now, conservative politicians, stop buying into the fiction. Stop it. Stop doing it. I know you kind of have to, but even as you propose these bills, you're essentially buying into you have to find a way to create bills that break the narrative with logic and data, right? So, and you have to speak authentically to the reality, not the rhetoric. I'm going to give you an example. As a disabled person, I'm really fucking sick and tired of everybody talking about MAiD without talking about disability. Okay? They are inextricably linked. You cannot access MAiD unless you are already defined legally as a disabled person with permanent and severe disability. Not unending suffering, irremediable suffering, medicalized, irremediable suffering. Right? And you can say, oh, well, you might just say you're suffering and you're sad and whatever else. Well, you still have to have a diagnosis, okay? Medical diagnosis is required, and the diagnosis has to be something that is known to cause extreme suffering with the best standard of care, right? They're not going to be able to get away with, you know, murdering someone for a splinter, although I did see that as a joke somewhere. But it's not really funny to me because it minimizes this reality that everyone's skating past. And it's a very useful reality if you're trying to talk to center leftists and even leftists who are like, how did we end up with a billionaire banker who doesn't even live here, whose entire family is American while he tells us to stop being American? Like, how did we end up here? The leftists that actually believe in social justice and compassion and whatever else. By pivoting into talking about things like MAiD as a disability rights issue that is data driven, that has a lot of history behind it, that has a tragic parallel history in Actian 4. Okay, and if you don't know what that is or how it's parallel, Google life unworthy of life, compassion projected coercive eugenics, burden based eugenics, and then, well, I mean, I can't go into all of it. It's gonna take too long. Point is, by separating them out, you're actively erasing disabled people. Now, I know that nobody thinks disabled people matter. It's abundantly clear everywhere I look that nobody thinks that. The only time people want to talk about us is when they blame mentally ill people for the addictions crisis somehow in the weird kind of indirect way. Oh, well, they're mentally ill, so that's where on the street. Everybody, the left and the right, oh, well, mentally. First of all, most of the people that are addicts and homeless are mentally ill because they're addicts or because they never got proper care for their mental illness. They're not just addicts because mental illness is unmanageable, okay? We've been defunding and underfunding mental health care for actual mental illness, right? Not for feelings and microaggressions, but for actual serious diagnostically relevant mental, like severe and irremediable without treatment, right? You cannot fix it with thinking, willpower, or any amount of therapy. Right, you can reduce symptoms with some actually good quality trauma therapy, but we don't give that to mentally ill people in Canada unless they're refugees. Yeah, I know, isn't that great? My point is, if drugs cause the delusory psychosis syndrome, then that to me is not a severe mental illness and is a completely separate category. But the point is, we've been underfunding psychiatric care and are nowhere near best practices standard, nowhere near. And we haven't been for a very long time. I want to be abundantly clear about that, okay? So lean into that. I know fiscal conservatives, we can't talk about funding or social welfare. Time to start thinking about it, okay? Because the vast majority of disabled people, particularly those with loud voices, are all like, oh, the right's the worst, because of what they might do or what they did in the past or whatever else. So you need to start pulling on that voter base. Disabled people make up 20% of the country, 1 in 5, okay? On top of that, disabled families who right now are, if they are able, having to bear the brunt of the financial gap between services, supports, and pensions and reality from the economic crisis that we're all in, where nobody can eat and food bank use is over the top. I was eating 1 meal a day and a snack before food inflation hit. Luckily, I've been able to reduce some of my non-covered prescriptions for supplements and things like that as a result of a great treatment. But the point is, it is so bad, okay? And we need an empathy play. We need a compassion play, and we need it to be data-driven and logical. End of the day, we need to have something that takes care of disabled people, just like we do elderly people and veterans, who, by the way, are the only ones that ever seem to get mentioned. Oh, the cost of living, it must be so bad for all those elderly and veteran disabled, but not other disabled. So if you're disabled, but you didn't get disabled by fighting in a war, wars that are evil, by the way, according to all the people that are like bringing it up. I mean, I don't even know. Then you're not worthy. And I'm sorry, all disabled people, no matter how you became disabled, are treated horrifically in this country. I'm sorry. Veterans do deserve a higher standard of care that, as we can afford it. I agree with that unequivocally. Especially if they actually served and were combat veterans. But I do not think that there is no distinction in unmet need, okay? Unmet need for a human being is unmet need for a human being. And a disability is a disability no matter how you acquired it. If I have CPTSD from multiple sexual assaults and other incidents in my life, that doesn't make me any less traumatized or in need of fewer services than someone who has CPTSD from combat. Now, maybe you want to create a qualitative metric where that person is more deserving than I am. I actually agree that when we're looking at a budget of a deficit where spending has to be controlled and managed, yeah, maybe we start every pilot program for access with veterans. And then maybe we expand it. And maybe we do prioritize working age disabled adults who have a higher chance of actually becoming employed when we start to roll those programs out, okay? I have a lot of ideas and policy ideas, and I'm gonna flesh those out elsewhere. But my point is, we need a compassion pivot and we need a meta strategic pivot. Get out of the fiction, bring it into reality every single time. Reframe it. Do not allow them to pull you into participating in the fiction, okay? Number one. Number two, we need a compassion pivot. You've got lean into the disabled voter base. We are massive. We are angry. We are frustrated. We see MAiD as a coercive eugenics program. And yes, a lot of disabled have $2,000 CDB fully funded. Okay, I get it. We can't do that. I'm not confused. And I am doing everything I can and I'm in the process of writing a whole blog series about how disabled advocacy needs to become more insular, more specific, completely divorced from any allyship or any expectation of allyship, and needs to go hard, data-driven policy suggestions, right? So find the data gaps for unmet need, demonstrate the unmet need, demonstrate the cost of continuing to fail to meet that need, both moral, ethical cost and financial cost, right? Because not treating severely mentally ill people leads to self-medication, which leads to addiction, which leads to increased addiction and homelessness, right? These are loops infinitely reproducing themselves, okay? And so jumping on a solution for funding mental health care for actually severely mentally ill people, not just, oh, let's lock them all up. How about we fund mental health care appropriately and lock them up when and as they violate the law? No more bail, no more repeat offender things. I do believe in NCR, but with limitations, including meds oversight for life, particularly with extremely violent crimes. I need to see in the blood work that you're taking your meds. And the meds need to be administered in such a way that if you have any freedom from oversight, the blood work will tell us whether or not you've been cheating, right? Like that's it, right? That's my belief. But the point is, this is the issue that actually touches on all of the other issues that are your common sense policy plans, right? Bring it back every single time. You've underfunded. You have made the problems worse with policies that are directly targeting and harming an incredibly vulnerable population. And then after making those policies and extending those policies and defending those policies against expert advice, when everything starts to crash down, instead of backing off, rethinking, reformulating, coming up with new policies, you instead decide to push through eugenics and say, oh, MAiD track 3, I know you're bipolar, your disease is trying to kill you, you're suicidal because of your, that's actually a symptom to define your disease. We know the meds aren't perfect, even when you take them every single day, and suicidal, it might come anyway. I know, let's extend your ability to choose death and make it real fast so that before your episode's over, you might make it out the door into heaven, right? Like, what are we doing? It would be like saying, you know what? Oh, you're a diabetic. You shouldn't have too much sugar. I know, let's just sit you here and you can eat cake all day. No harm in that. I know that's a terrible analogy. It's so hard to make an analogy because nothing really reaches the gravity in the harm. And it's so nonsensical when you try to assert an analogy in a physical illness that actually measures to the level of harm that it almost never works. I'm going to work on finding a better one. But anyway, long story short, now too long of a video, but conservatives, I beg you, meta strategic pivot. Stop participating in the fictions. Start asserting the reality. Use data. Use hard data. Make use of AI. Find some autistic people like myself that are willing to volunteer, or pay them. Better, pay them. Call it a pilot work program for a policy you want to put in place when you get into office. Get some hyperlexical autists on board. Get them in with the AI and start building data packets and strategic approaches to bust the fictions so you don't keep getting pulled into them. Okay? And we're not always in defensive mode. And then the second thing, I know I'm repeating things, but I'm getting a bit tired, so forgive me. And I'm trying really hard not to completely lose my shit and go into full-blown activated over. Anyway, second thing, compassion pivot. Lean in. And yeah, maybe some fiscal conservatives will give you shit. Maybe you'll get some hard-nosed people that don't think disabled people have a right to any support from the government, and they'll be mad about it. But I guarantee you the vast majority of Canadians believe in a social safety net that is reasonable, built on data, and where the purpose of that safety net is to support those who literally cannot support themselves, and to bolster those who maybe could but need a lot more help into employment and more financial dependence with services that actually work. So right now, they can literally say they're helping X number of disabled people just by having us be clients for a few months, even if they never get us a job. They can say they've placed us in employment if they get us a job and we lose it in a week. Okay? Money and grants that are going to third-party work organizations or whatever else to help disabled people need to start coming with some impact metrics. i.e., if at the end of the first year, 75% of the clients that had a reasonable chance of employment are still not employed in a sustainable way with an expectation of staying employed, guess what? That's a failure. That doesn't get to count as a success, right? This is how we do it. I actually believe in encouraging work because having a purpose really matters. Another thing we can do, well, I said I wasn't going to do policies here, but I'm just going to throw it out there in case anybody watched this far that's actually a Conservative Party person and can get something done with some of this. But the Canada Council for the Arts, we're funding it anyway. It's going to keep getting funded, I expect. I don't expect that's going to stop. But start building a utility model into it. So we have X number of unemployed, disabled people that have conditions that lead to a prevalence for creativity. Mentally ill people. That population is desperately underserved. That population maybe should have priority access to funding. And maybe abled Canadians can find a way to get themselves published. Block grants can go to presses, for sure. I don't see a problem with that, really. I mean, I'd have to look a lot deeper into the whole thing, but I see that as a value added. But individual artists should only be funded insofar as they are hampered in their ability to make art without a little bit of financial investment, like a business grant for artists that are trying to engage in a neurotypical world that doesn't make space for how they communicate, that doesn't even always make space for their art, yet actually always it's full of art. Okay, mental illness is all over the art space, and it always has been. There's a genetic prevalence towards creativity. And whenever you tell non-mentally ill people, how dare you say only mentally ill people are creative? Like the absolute horrendous level of stigma and hatred for this population that just undergirds all the ways we talk about it. And by the way, that's why they're not talking about it. That's why they only ever talk about it in an indirect kind of causation, aka deflection manner. Indirect causation, deflection, or, oh, those poor victims who have no agency, no ability to speak for themselves, no value or worth outside of how they function as a pawn in this conversation. Fuck that shit, okay? We are a massive voting body, okay? And it's time to start thinking about how to utilize compassion within a framework of data. I have this line that came out of me when I was writing some poems. Edge compassion with reason. That is how you win the Canadian voter. Okay? Reason, data, compassion. It has to be there. Consideration for others is core into our identity. It just is. Wanting to help a person that cannot help themselves is core into our identity. Look at all these war stories about Canadians in the world wars. The most terrifying to the enemies, most loved by the Allied citizenry. When we liberated them, kindest to the citizenry, most vicious to the enemy. That was our brand, okay? And I think it is core in there. Maybe it's something to do with living in wilderness with weapons everywhere, and a lot of mixed cultures, and a need to not piss everybody off. I don't know. But what I do know is, oh, this is the other thing that I almost forgot about. No, I'm going to make a separate video on that. Okay.